easily, because it will have a disadvantage regarding fissile material in comparison to the P5 countries. But the way things stand now, FMCT will really only impact Pakistan. So in many ways, if you think about it, the FMCT only is directed against Pakistan. And therefore Pakistan, whether if it stands all alone on it, should continue to stand alone on it, because it is crucial to the future of Pakistan's security. It is the single most crucial politico-diplomatic issue for Pakistan in terms of sustaining a credible nuclear deterrence. Maybe down the road in 5 to 7 years, we may accept an FMCT, because by then we may have built up a proportionately better reserve of fissile material as our plutonium production increases. But right now, we cannot accept anything like that. Our position on supplier cartels is the same, the most important supplier cartel being the NSG. Americans tried desperately, the Obama administration, for years and years to get India squeezed in as a member. Luckily that has not happened, and more of the NSG states are now looking towards a criteria-based approach that the Chinese have been floating quite rationally in the NSG, and so far the Modi government will have to sit outside. But they've got some advantages. They got the waiver from the NSG, which upset the nuclear balance again in South Asia. But in any case, the fact of the matter is that the stability of the nuclear deterrence in South Asia is dependent on developments from both sides of the Pakistan-India border. And so far, this deterrence stability, if you look at the facts, is being undermined by developments on the Indian side in terms of a constant quest to find a means of rationalizing a war-fighting doctrine, while also breaking out from the stalemate which they clearly see of the nuclear deterrence through the development of a missile defense program. For Pakistan, the development of a wider range of missiles, including the Nasr, is a means to sustain the credibility of the deterrence, which will be bolstered further by our second strike capability development, which is now possible because of the development of Nasr. Finally, future course then, what do we see? Well, the main thing is that for stability, finally the two sides have to dialogue. Pakistan and India have to have a strategic dialogue on the nuclear issue, including moves towards nuclear risk reduction. Now that cannot happen in itself, because political conflicts like Kashmir, Siachen, Sir Creek, the water disputes, resolutions are needed on these as well to help the dialogue move further on nuclear risk reduction and a strategic dialogue on the nuclear issue as a whole. And secondly, at the technical level, there has to be in place a strategic nuclear dialogue which focuses on number balancing, number crunching in other words, transparency, technical nuclear cooperation, and other CSBMs. That is confidence and security building measures. And amongst these, at the end of the day, included in if you want to really establish strategic nuclear stability, Pakistan and India have to move on to conventional force reductions as well, much as it may pain Mr. Modi. But at some stage, you can't go on building your conventional weapons and expect that the nuclear deterrence will be enough, so Pakistan will not do anything. That is not how things happen, especially because a lot of the conventional offensive weapon systems that India is acquiring are Pakistan specific because of terrain issues. They're not specific, but can't be used against China. And in this case, I think the Paris Treaty for conventional force reductions in Europe is a very appropriate model for Pakistan and India to examine, because it's premised on the principle of mutual balanced reductions. Both Pakistan and India need to realize that nuclear antagonists cannot be locked in a zero-sum game. Their survival is linked together now. So nuclear deterrence requires the prevalence of conflict maybe, but certainly common interest from both sides. This can push in either two directions. One, compel the stronger side to take advantage by taking calculated risks, knowing the nuclear-related concerns that prevail. This is what India is trying to do, but this is a course that is dangerous and potentially fatal. Second, both sides can move across towards cooperation without the smaller state being overwhelmed by the larger one. and away from risk-ridden policies like limited war, whether in the form of cold start or the new now sussing out. Finally, it has to be remembered that within the context of South Asia, it is not technology denial that will address the issue of nuclear stability, but political will. And wild accusations from Western analysts is not going to have any impact on how our nuclear program progresses. Let that be very clear to all and everyone. Thank you very much.
Well, that was Dr. Shiri Mazari, who spoke for about 7-8 minutes, but then the clock stopped. Without much further ado, may I now invite our next speaker, Mr. Antoine Levick, who would focus in the same context on maritime damage. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back in Islamabad. The keynote speaker earlier and the previous speaker mentioned both nuclear submarines and nuclearization of the Indian Ocean. And because the title of this session, for the first time in this series of workshops, includes a mention of the sea, I thought what I could usefully do is say a few words about the maritime focus of deterrence and doctrine. So today I'd like to make 4 points. First, nuclearization at sea can mean several things. Second, the baseline facts to date in this region, in my view, leave many futures open, including some for optimists. Third, today nations take nuclear weapons to sea to purposefully support strategic deterrence. And fourth, the use of nuclear weapons at sea for all other purposes is politically and militarily devalued. So first, what do we mean by nuclearization at sea? I think we entail 2 different things. Most often, we mean the deployment of nuclear weapons on purpose-designed and purpose-made platforms, foremost the tutelary SSBN, with its dedicated suite of supporting all-important, survivable command and control infrastructure. Typically, SSBNs are all domain capable, but especially designed for retaliatory striking on land, including islands, where the bulk of counterforce, but especially counter-value targets reside. This capability lens has been the focus of the historical notion of triad, which so many analysts talk about. The second lens is the medium. The sea is a space where nuclear release can happen from within it, for example, a submarine onto a carrier, but also using land and air-launched missiles into the maritime domain. In 1987, for example, an article in the ISS journal Survival made very clear in the Soviet case that questions of which forces strike which medium matters a lot because different services have different weight in countries' higher defense management, especially within decision-making on nuclear use. So nuclearizing the sea is in fact a useful notion that reminds us of all important cross-domain, cross-medium and cross-service effects. I think this is helpful when states decide on the cost-benefit of like-to-like responses, when alternative or asymmetrical responses can possibly be found credibly in other domains like cyber, space, or in thinking in conventional rather than nuclear armories terms. Let me turn to my second point. The facts making up a regional baseline in South Asia. I take note that India reportedly commissioned last August its first nuclear propulsion boat, the first of the Ariane submarine class. In January this year, India released its maritime security strategy, which compared to the 2009 doctrine, introduced the notion of nuclear coercion, which alongside conflict is what India directs its nuclear deterrence against. I also take note on the other side of the border of 4 facts about Pakistani policymaking. 1, the inauguration in 2012 of a Naval Strategic Forces Command. 2, the commissioning last month of Pakistan's first very low frequency facility in Karachi. 3, the scarcity of regular high-level public statements that Pakistan intends to take nuclear weapons at sea. And 4, many statements reiterating Pakistan's commitment to both credible minimum deterrence and full-spectrum deterrence. To me, these developments indicate that many decisions which are of the nature to affect regional and deterrent stability remain to be taken, and I think this is cause for optimism. Thirdly, let me now turn to the currency of strategic deterrence. Today, nations taking nuclear weapons to sea do so overwhelmingly in order to acquire a second assured strike capability. The reason for this is that assured second strike stabilizes deterrence. In other words, taking nuclear weapons to sea is a means to strengthen deterrence, not undermine it. Taking nuclear weapons to sea to fulfill this deterrence purpose is eye-wateringly expensive, setting a very tall order for any nation. The gold standard is to put long-range ballistic missiles in 3 to 4 nuclear-powered hulls to achieve continuous at-sea deterrence. In 2015, for example, the UK's Strategic Defence and Security Review estimated that the next class of SSBNs the country would need, and I'm just talking about the hulls here, not the missile system, would cost at least $39 billion. And there's even a provision for it to go over $51 billion if we include a contingency fund, which the document also refers to. To my mind, this is the equivalent of the entire investment which Pakistan and China are looking at for CPEC. And I think in terms of national endeavour, this gives a sense of the enormity of the commitment it is for a nation to just develop that particular vector, the SSBN. So for any nation keen to avoid an arms race or slow down the treadmill on the basis of cost considerations, I think acquiring this sort of capability without very clear-cut objectives can be ruinous. The lead time to reach continuous at-sea deterrence is obviously also counted in decades. Strategic culture steeped in maritime domain awareness, or an ability to operate within the maritime domain comfortably, is another consideration. When entrusted with a nuclear weapon, navies whose first and historic business is conventional defense must rethink their entire training, logistics, and doctrinal integration. Another